Google announced a new $300 million fact-checking initiative to fight fake news. Progressives roll out some hilarious new climate change talking points, and Don Lemon perfectly illustrates the left's response to last weekend's March for Our Lives. You're listening to the Propaganda Report. I'm Brad Binkley here with Monica Perez. Monica, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. It's a nice day outside today. It's finally 70s. It's not cold.
Yes. I put my turtle out to bask.
Yeah, you were talking about your turtle the other day. You were talking about you feed your turtle and it's like ever expanding when you feed it or something like that?
Yeah, it gets bigger and I can't make it less big. So I have to really discipline myself and it begs. So it gets right up against its glass. It lives in a water aquarium thing and it just furiously flaps its arms and legs as if it wants to swim through the glass. And you really want to help it. You know, you
like
feel bad for it. Yeah. You feel bad for it. And I was trying to like feed it because I thought it would make it happy. And it makes it happy for like 5 minutes. And now it's getting bigger. So I've got to pull back on that. And it's angry. Wow. It's an angry turtle, red-eared slider. And their eyes, they just have these red things on their ears, I guess. And it just makes them look angry all the time. It bites me. And it's going to live 40 years, so I can't,
Gosh, that sounds like a very
I found
pleasant...
it on the street. I rescued it. I would never incarcerate a wild animal, but it was dying.
And it can't exercise. It can't ever lose weight.
Well, it's the carapace. I don't know how you pronounce it. Like the shell gets bigger, and maybe it loses weight on the inside, but the shell is always going to be big, and then it's got to rattle around in this tiny aquarium. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you got to get a bigger aquarium if you let it get bigger.
How old is it now?
Oh, I think it's like, I found it 2 years ago. So I think it's like 3.
There are some turtles that live like hundreds of years. There's like one that's like 200 years old.
Yeah, this one's probably will outlive me. I want to throw it into a pond, but I can't bring myself to do it.
You're going to hear some banging on your door. You're going to open it up. It's just going to be hungry.
I have compassion for it, but it's so unsympathetic. It's angry and it hates me. And oh my gosh, it took me 2 hours to clean its tank the other day because they're all so filthy. It's just the craziest. I wish I could offer it up for the love of God, but I think God is probably like, I gave it to you to eat it.
So you have a belligerent turtle.
Belligerent, needy, demanding. I mean, it's like the people who have cats, they're like, oh, cats are, they act like they rule the roost. Get a turtle, see who's boss.
Yeah, that's a commitment. If you buy a turtle with a bad disposition, you got a lifelong chore.
It's really, I feel I try to get, make it feel like an exercise and gratitude for the ability to perform these tasks, but it's
turtles, and there's some whales that are like or sharks that can live like 500 years.
No way.
Yeah, there's some that are still, at least that's what they say anyway, the scientists.
Right.
Maybe they're lying, I don't know. But I know they're trying to reverse engineer the DNA of these animals so they can try and figure out how we can live that long.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And there's probably some people who figured that out, because I know back in the 80s, there was a doctor who figured out the chromosomes that would enable humans to regenerate limbs. And he was studying frogs. But as soon as he figured it out, as soon as he helped someone heal, he helped someone who got into a motorcycle accident heal in like a couple of weeks, when normally it would have taken months for someone to heal. And he did it by switching a chromosome that he had discovered in frogs and doing experimentations with frogs, because frogs can't regenerate either, but he discovered how to enable them to heal faster and grow their limbs again.
But a chromosome is in every single cell. How could he manipulate a full-grown person that way?
I have no idea. I don't know the science of it.
Gene therapy. I don't know what that even is.
It's probably similar to the genetic engineering stuff with like CRISPR they're doing right now. But as soon as this guy figured this out, and this guy was a Navy doctor who had a long list of accomplishments, and he was doing this research for the government. But as soon as he figured this out, they cut off his funding. I'm sure they took all the research, and he ended up having to open up clinics like around Texas and Mexico to continue his research.
Oh, that reminds me of Draco. If there's truth to that, I thought there was at the time, where it basically cures viruses. Viruses are the things that you can't get a cure for. So it was saying that it can cure this stuff. And
what's Draco?
Draco is the drug or therapy or whatever that they said would cure everything from herpes to AIDS to Ebola. I don't know what. And it was at MIT, and then it was at DARPA, and then the guy's out on the street with a cup saying, I need money for Draco. And I'm like, but I wrote to them. I was like, what do you need money for Draco for? It's like, nobody will fund it. We got kicked out. I don't know why. It's like, oh, because they need stuff like Ebola and AIDS and all that for their agendas.
Yeah, it's the second biggest industry, right? The pharmaceutical industry.
Oh, I don't know, but it's definitely getting worse, and running the show and Obamacare and CDC. And the guy who's going to run the CDC was an AIDS researcher. And I am reading this book by Nancy Turner Banks that talks about, my brother supposedly died of AIDS, but he said it was the AZT that was making him sick. And he got an AIDS test without any symptoms. He just was quitting heroin and wanted a clean bill of health. Well, they didn't give him a clean bill of health. They gave him AZT. And he thought it was killing him. And now I'm convinced. And Nancy Turner Banks was writing how all the regular tests for viruses, all the science that you would normally apply to viruses, they modify for HIV, because what you're seeing, what they're calling a virus, is actually damaged cell parts like RNA and DNA and stuff that's extruded by cells in crisis from the immunocompromised position. So they have AIDS, they have an autoimmune deficiency syndrome, but it's not caused by a virus. It's caused by stress, lifestyle. It makes you vulnerable to tuberculosis, hepatitis, all these things. So when I saw that the guy who was going to run the CDC was an AIDS researcher, after reading her book that says that they have to be compromised if they are going along with the party line on that, because it's like a myth of what the real science behind AIDS is. So that's why I feel like the CDC is just one big propaganda machine that's in the service of both the health industry and the agendas that health crises promote.
Yeah, there's a rabbit hole with healthcare for sure. All right. So Google just announced last week that they are launching a new $300 million program to fight fake news. Another one. They already announced one last year. In fact, they funded the entire origins of the fight against fake news because they are the ones that funded First Draft News.
I remember, may I interrupt? I remember when they said they were hiring 10,000 human beings to censor YouTube, and about a month later, we had the Parkland shooting, and that's when I noticed that YouTube, and that's when I got censored. You got censored. The censors really started to take effect, I would say, around Valentine's Day this year, 2018.
Yeah,
they said they hired 10,000 YouTube and censors, and I think Zuckerberg said he was just hiring 40,000 more Facebook censors.
Well, this goes along with some of the themes that are coming out of the Parkland shooting and the March for Life, where only one opinion is allowed to be heard.
March for Our Lives. The March for Life is a pro-life demonstration.
Right. Well, the theme was, this is not two sides. This is not political. Guns need to be regulated. So it is political. It's the whole idea, all of their literature, all of their propaganda, that there's only one side of this argument. The same thing that Lakoff talks about. This new Google program is kind of playing into that. And I'll play you their video announcement, and then I'll tell you what the prongs of it are and how it could potentially be used against us, which, by the way, I should preface this by saying they're partnered with First Draft News, which is themselves. They helped start that, and that is now currently funded by the Knight Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, George Soros. They are partnered with the International Fact-Checking Network, which is the network that is funded by Soros. The Knight Foundation, also funded by Google, and they determine who is a credible fact checker, who gets certified as a fact checker, which they certify Snopes, they certify PolitiFact. It's a completely progressive left-wing bias. The entire operation is. There's nothing unbiased and fair about it. And what they teach people, how they teach people to evaluate fake news, is what you've talked about a lot, is they teach them to decide which sources they should trust or not, and then they in turn tell them which sources to trust. So this is the groups that they are partnering with on this project.
I have a friend who's like now my litmus test for this stuff because she's so radical. And she literally can't like when I tell her that my kids sometimes say things that their teachers look at them funny. And my argument is like the teachers preach tolerance, but they have no tolerance for other political ideas. And my friend's like, well, that's not another political idea. He's just wrong.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I mean, literally, like, right. It's impossible to have a conversation with her. This is an intelligent person. And she just has this idea that, well, why? I said, well, if he was pro-choice, he wouldn't have any problems. But if he was pro-life, he's going to have problems. So I tell him he's got to watch what he says when he's like, whatever. She's like, but he shouldn't be pro-life. He should have problems if he's pro-life. And I'm like, but it's a political thing. Like, I'm not even into it with her. And she's just like, but I don't even understand, like, why they should push back on him when he says stuff like that.
It's like that sign that a lot of people at the March for Our Lives were holding that says, protect children outside the womb.
But not inside the womb?
You can apply whatever the rest is.
Yeah, that March for Our Lives and March for Life, I noticed it right away. And you, I think, also noticed it, that they are definitely, that was no accident. And they act like Republicans are murderers. That's what they say, which, like, anti-abortion activists will say abortion is murder. And I can understand why they say that. But Republicans are murderers because Nicholas Cruz allegedly killed some students is more of a stretch.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a stretch.
But they're using the same language. They're co-opting it. That's why I corrected you vehemently, because I know they're going for that. They're going for conflating the propaganda.
Yeah, it's a completely radical march. And they keep saying on the news, there was even an article on CNN today, you even had a caller call in and say this, they're not trying to take your guns. Maybe they're not right now, because the purpose of this, it was a voter drive, and they're using the gun thing to exploit people and get them there to exploit their emotions. But there are people who do ultimately want to take guns, and there were signs everywhere, people saying, like, I saw one sign saying, yes, actually, I am here to take your guns. And the scary thing about that isn't that people had those signs. The scary thing about it is that the people who organize the march provided those signs.
So they got ahead of it.
But yeah, there was a sign, and not just one of them. There was multiple signs, which means this sign was given out by the march organizers, and they even had locations where you could come pick up your signs that they sent out in emails and stuff. So they organized all the signs, and they told people what to say. So one of the signs that they passed out was, okay, we will pry it from your cold, dead hands.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I mean, they're aggressive. They promote violence. And I'll tell you two things. The foreshadowing for the Second Amendment no longer being sacrosanct was the clip you played for me of Stacey Abrams saying, I can call for gun control without paying respect to the Second Amendment. And then today, there was an op-ed, I don't know what it was in the New York Times or whatever, I was listening to it on the radio, from former Supreme Court Justice Stevens. I guess he retired a couple of years ago. He was a Republican. Right. And he called for repealing the Second Amendment. And I'll tell you, that's why I did that hashtag. It will take a Republican.
Yep. Yeah. They're getting that theme out there to get it discussed. That's how they do it. They put the idea into the public consciousness. They make them have the debate, and then ultimately they try to push it to where the public ask for the legislation they had already planned on implementing. All right, back to the Google News thing. This is their video announcement. I shortened it a little bit, but this is the announcement of the Google News Initiative.
Access to reliable, quality information should be a right of anybody, wherever they live.
Today, the journalism industry faces many challenges.
Readership has become more fragmented.
How can news organizations remain relevant in the digital age?
70% of people can't distinguish between a real story and fake news.
Disinformation is on the rise. Trust in media is falling. Journalists are having to do more with less.
A lot of these solutions will come from the journalism industry and the tech industry working together.
So we're announcing the Google News Initiative, our effort to enable journalism to thrive in a digital age. It will enable new models for sustainable journalism, elevate quality journalism, and ensure that technology allows journalists to do their jobs even better.
Okay. Everybody has a right to quality information. That's the Bernie Sanders. Healthcare has a right. When you start talking about things in rights, then you imply that the government needs to protect those rights. So that means the government needs to decide which information we have access to and which information is true and which is not. Secondly, they talk about how everything is fragmented right now because of the digital age. Now that goes back to Obama's common set of facts. It's no more fragmentation, no more different opinions, different perspectives. We need to centralize this and get this back to one common set of facts. And then they talk about how news journalists are suffering because of the digital age, these new obstacles. What that is these alternative sources of information. The barrier to entry has lowered, which has made it harder for people like the New York Times. That's what they're saying right there. So they need to help them recover and regain control over the sources and the flow of information. And
I will say, when I first wrote about Obama saying there needs to be a truthiness test and all that, which was even before the common set of facts thing that he and John McCain both promote, I talked about the Vernon Jordan. I've talked about this article so many times, but it was absolutely prescient in that it talks about Obama saying that stuff, about Melania using the bully excuse to censor the web, Facebook. That was even before anyone thought she was going to be in the White House. And then Vern Jordan, the CFR guy, Clinton guy, made that speech, which was turned into an article saying that basically tech and journalism needs to join forces to correct news, to shape it, to take the responsibility for shaping people's opinions, which is exactly what they just said in that clip.
Absolutely. And there's two prongs to this program. The first one is to elevate quality journalism. And there's three prongs inside that one. And how they're going to do that is, one, an adjusted algorithm that points to authoritative sources. They're already doing this kind of in general, but specifically in the context of breaking news and crisis situations. So what I gather from reading their PR post on this is that, say something like the Parkland shooting happens and there's a bunch of information coming out. They talk about how trusted sources are out there on the ground still investigating it. Meanwhile, other people are spreading speculation that ends up being false on the internet. They say that what they're going to do is they're going to point the searches to those trusted networks that are doing the investigation. So they're not going to allow anybody who speculates or who is not a trusted authority source rise to the top of the searches. So if you publish something quickly, or if you watch CNN's live coverage of, say, the Parkland shooting, and you see some contradiction in the reporting, you spot something that's ignored, and you write an article on that, that article is going to be suppressed in favor of anything that CNN publishes, so to prevent these alternative, quote-unquote, conspiracy theories from arising. That way, these news sources don't have to adjust the record and defend themselves when people are watching them and calling out their contradictions.
And how about what would really be the answer to verifiable truth is every single solitary person on the ground during any event has a voice memo, has a camera, has Facebook Live, has every possible way of recording actual facts in real time, streaming without editing, and generating it straight up for everybody to see forever. So what they need to do if they want to correct that, I mean, that is pure raw facts in evidence disseminated instantly to everyone. How could you possibly combat that truth if you don't make sure that absolutely no raw data is allowed? And somehow they do it, because you're not getting, even these things, if they're real or false or whatever, you're not getting millions of video clips coming out of Vegas or Parkland. I mean, there should, certainly be thousands of clips coming out of Vegas. Have you seen thousands of firsthand clips coming out of Vegas?
No, they're doing it for YouTube also. Like you just said, the live streaming stuff, when people are trying to stream stuff live, they talk about in their press release that they're also applying this to YouTube. They're going to have a top story section. In fact, I think it's already applying in the United States. I think they're already testing it right now. So yeah, they're doing exactly what you said. They're going to be censoring these alternative sources of non-authoritative information from rising to the top. They're going to be suppressing them, is essentially what they're talking about. Exactly what they did before World War I and World War II. I know we talked about that last week. The second part of it, and this goes into the suppression of the news, is to fight misinformation and disinformation with what they call a disinfo lab. And the Disinfo Lab, they're combining some of the other techniques that they've already worked with. And like I said, they're partnered with First Draft News, which is what they initially created, which is now funded by Soros and others like him. But this Disinfo Lab is going to use those trust indicators, those 7 or 8 trust indicators that were published 6 months ago to determine what is disinformation and what is not. So ultimately, those trust indicators basically speak to what is a reputable authority source.
But what is a trust indicator? It's you can trust this, or are there parameters?
There's 7 or 8 prongs. I don't have them written down. The first couple are is it a known website? The second one is do you recognize the author's name?
Which is hilarious because it sounds to me like they would all violate the fallacies, you know what I mean? In argument and debate, there's all fallacies, like calling on an authority when it's irrelevant, or having an ad hominem attack when it's irrelevant. You know what I mean?
It all promotes the analysis of the person or the network, and not the analysis of the content.
And that's why our poor education is deliberately poor. They deliberately don't want you to be able to function civically.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because the third prong, and the most dangerous one, in my opinion, is called MediaWise, which is their digital information literacy that they will be teaching for free to teens and children around the world. And they're already offering some courses on YouTube from known and reputable, they make sure to talk about reputable YouTube stars. It's called Crash Course, if anybody wants to check it out. I watched some of the videos yesterday, and they haven't gotten to the real meat of it yet, but they do talk about in the first episode of their digital info literacy, that they're going to be teaching people how to recognize trusted sources. So not how to analyze the accuracy of content, but trusted sources is what the focus is on.
Well, I told you when I was looking at different schools for my kids, there was clearly a protocol or a memo that went out at the highest levels. And these schools, you were right. When you identified that Ossoff went to what was called an independent school, I just always thought of it as a private school or whatever, but they actually have, I think, I'm trying to understand it, but I think there is kind of a central portal of what these elite independent schools, what's the latest. It's like, I used to have a great hairdresser. He was French. And he used to, I go back to France every year, like he was a master hairdresser or whatever. And in order to keep up, maybe I'm got the details wrong, but I don't think so. In order to keep up his credential, or at least for his own self-respect, he used to go to these conferences where he would learn new haircutting techniques and stuff like that. He was great. So what I think, it's all in good faith. They look at this stuff and say, what is on the agenda for cutting edge superior education? And I cannot help but feel that there is a newly launched, pervasive information assessment protocol, and because every single school I've been going to talks about how they teach kids to figure out truth on the internet, and they're all saying the same thing, and it's all stuff that I've raised my hand and I'm like, but you're wrong.
Yeah.
How can you make that argument? Why would CBS be more trustworthy than somebody you have personal experience, that you have checked their evidence? That should be your number one thing. Have I personally experienced truth or falsehood that I verified independently from this source or that source?
Well, it's not about the evidence, Monica. It's about CBS. You've heard of them, right?
Yes, but
that's what matters.
They don't ever talk about, and this is absolutely, you have to be a moron not to ask the question, does this source have a view? Does the source have a view? Does it have an agenda? Does it have connections? Does it have an interest? That should be your absolute first disqualifying factor for any source, and you could not go to any authoritative source and not say yes.
No, the question is, do they have a wrong interest?
Exactly, and that circles back to my friend who literally thinks that our political speech should be suppressed when we're wrong.
All right, now the second part, which plays into that, is called Subscribe with Google, and the pitch is priceless. The pitch is a perfect example of how they sell you on the convenience that they're offering while blinding to the broader implications. Here's the pitch. I'll read it to you. If you've ever subscribed to a news site, you know that it can sometimes be an onerous task. This isn't the publisher's fault. It's just the way websites work. You have to type in your name, your email, maybe a username, and then make up a new password. Like you, we love journalism, but we're less excited about filling in all the web forms and clicking on forgotten passwords. So today we're announcing Subscribe with Google, the simplest way to subscribe to news publications and maintain access everywhere. Websites, apps, even search results. Subscribe with Google lets you buy a subscription using your Google account on participating news sites. That's the important part. Participating news sites. Select the publisher offer you'd like to buy, click subscribe, and you're done. You'll automatically be signed into the site, and you can pay securely and privately with any credit card you've used with Google in the past. Google does the billing, keeps your payment method secure, and makes it easy for you to manage your subscriptions all in one place. You'll soon be able to use Subscribe with Google on any of our launch partners, which include the New York Times and the Washington Post, liberal outlets. No right-wing or middle-of-the-road outlets involved in their initial launch. And then they go on to say that paying for a subscription is a clear indication that you value and trust your subscribed publication as a source. Since you trust that subscribed publication, they will highlight those sources across Google services. So when you search for a news topic for which your subscribed publication has relevant results, they will showcase these so that they're easy for you to see and access without disrupting the search ranking for the rest of the page. So it will be prioritized above everything else and will leave the initial impression on most people's minds about what certain stories are about. They do have a form you can fill out to try and get accepted to this program as a news source.
Yeah.
But if it's anything like the International Fact-Checking Network, which is their partner on this program, then it's going to be only liberal, left-wing, progressive sources that are certified.
Well, this is why I feel like I should appeal my YouTube ban, even though I'm just as happy letting it run out because I don't care at all. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of the questions ultimately is, have you ever been banned or gotten any strikes on YouTube? Or they will know that. Right. You know what I mean? So I have to fight it. I have to fight the WordPress thing. I'm getting attacked and I just don't care. But I think I have to care because it's going to be on my permanent record.
Yeah, you should repeal it. You can. They'll take it off.
I don't feel like it. I'm busy. I've got 10 loads of laundry to do.
It takes like 5 minutes to send a message.
Whatever.
Yeah. The point is that on the premise of it's going to be helping the reader, it'd be more convenient to subscribe to what they want. In reality, it seems like it's simply going to prioritize the sources that it accepts into its program. So it's just another way to suppress alternative information under the guise of convenience.
Yeah, to censor and promote it. And they act like this is the thing. I actually put Truth Star Boy on the job, and we've got to do a podcast with him because there's tons of evidence, and we just need to bring it out of that these guys got their start and still to this day work hand in hand with the government. So they act like it's a private service that's just helping you, but they have such an advantage. Even just the government issued patents give these guys the advantage to bankrupt you before you even launch your competitor, even if you're not stealing their patents. You know what I'm saying? So they act like this is private, but it isn't, because it's promoted by the government and then favors one source over another. It's only one or two steps removed from political censorship in violation of the First Amendment.
Absolutely. Now, Don Lemon verifies everything we're talking about right now when it comes to the attitude that progressives have regarding an alternative perspective or facts that haven't been revealed. This is Don Lemon on his show last night. They're having a discussion about the ability to criticize the students when they say really, really radical things, because they're saying insanely radical things. If you watched any of the speeches at the March for Our Lives, I mean, this was insane how radical this thing was. And this is a commentator. I can't remember her name right now, but it's a black woman who is a Republican, and she is talking. Maybe it might be Mia. She's talking about how you can't even criticize these students when they say something radical. Here is Don Lemon's response.
They have a right to do this, but I also think that if you criticize some of what they're saying, then all of a sudden you're the bad guy. But
you are the bad guy.
That's what my friend says.
Yeah, no qualms about it. You're the bad guy. See, this is how they control it right here. When someone presents a reasonable argument, he rolls his eyes and goes, come on, cuts them off, has his say to kind of discredit what they said, and then he closes out the show or cuts to commercial. This is the rest of that conversation.
And he's a reputable source, according to Google, yes. I'm sure.
Yeah, top of the line source. He's going to be the top of your search engine when you search.
Cooper.
The discussion here has become whether they can be criticized or scrutinized for some of the more extreme things that some of the people that have been leading this movement have said. And I think that there is some room here for scrutiny. That's all.
I think emotion is totally understandable for people who've been through terrible things, whatever it is. And I'm not in any way demeaning that or demeaning their right to express their emotion.
Right,
but emotion also should not guide policy. And when it comes to policy, when you talk about an assault weapons ban, I hate that term. All guns, by definition, are assault weapons. So it's really a nonsense term.
No, they're not.
In and of itself.
Steve,
what you're talking about is...
Steve. We're out of time. I got to go.
Ban, the so-called assault weapons ban was about cosmetics of guns.
I got to go. We're over. And anyway, I don't think the kids should be criticized. I think that we should allow them to vent, and I think we should listen to them because we did not suffer the horrible tragedy that they did, and we should let our lawmakers do their jobs.
That was a very reasonable argument the other person was making, and he just brushes it off like it's insane.
But even, was it Mia Love? Even the Republican was saying you can't call all guns, that Steve or whoever the other guy wasn't making friends on either side of that argument, which is usually the person you want to give some airtime to. Oh, a different opinion.
Yeah, he goes, all guns are assault rifles. She goes, no, they're not.
All guns are not assault. That was the Republican who said that, right?
Yeah, that was the Republican who said that.
Because by calling it an assault weapon, it makes it sound like guns are always used to be aggressive. And in fact, guns are what law-abiding citizens want guns for defense. It's not for assaulting someone. It's for deterring and defending.
Yeah.
They're all deterrents and they're all defensive.
That's how they exploit that whole thing is they don't present things with concrete definitions. The terminology they're using for the legislation that they're talking about very vaguely is, close the gun show loophole, but no more assault rifles. Nobody can define exactly what these are. And that's on purpose because if you can use these vague words and you can put them into some sort of legislation, then you can flexibly apply them to any situation you want as it benefits you. That's why they're not specific on the language and the definition, because specific language, concrete definitions, that limits the applicability of stuff.
And to call stuff a loophole as if it's some mistake, when the gun show loophole is simply a states' rights issue. The states regulate those gun shows, and they don't have to use the federal background check system. And a lot of people don't want the background check system because, and this is what I was taught from when I was a kid, my father said, you cannot register your weapons because when you have an invasion or you have a totalitarian dictatorship, that's the list of people they kill. And it's not like, well, they couldn't kill 10 million people. Really? Ask Stalin, ask Hitler, ask Mao, ask Pol Pot. They want to kill those people. They want to reduce the population. It happened in Hungary. It happened in Iraq. They want to reduce the population anyway because it make it easier to deal with. And they want to identify the people who will resist. That's what a gun registry is. And at the gun shows that are run by states who do not participate in the federal registry, which is what a background check is, that is because they're exercising their rights as a state to regulate that. And that is not a loophole.
Right. But they want to call it.
I don't really get passionate, but that just aggravates me because
they use that language on purpose because people don't ask questions about it. They just get people on board through the emotional appeal. And they say, you're going to pitch this legislation and here's what you're going to say. Here's your talking points. And they don't ever demand concrete definitions or concrete examples because if they did, it would limit the applicability, like I said. And if they can get people to accept it as the vaguely defined terminology that it is, then if it ever gets pushed into law, they can use it to do exactly what you just said. The Supreme Court can expand its applicability to anything. They can persecute people politically. They can do whatever they want as long as they don't have to be nailed down to a concrete definition. So that's why it's funny to watch these videos when you people asking what exactly is assault rifle, and people can't define it, and they haven't even thought about it.
I have to add something though.
Good.
It took me the longest time to understand, like just recently. I've been following this topic for as long as I can remember, and I only just recently understood what they were talking about at the gun show loophole. I clicked in my mind, like, it's not a loophole. And I want to tell listeners that Gun Owners of America, GOA, and to a lesser extent, I think, The Truth About Guns, TAG, whatever, are two websites that I have found some good concrete arguments. I don't think the NRA is really to be trusted, and I think Georgia Carry doesn't really keep up their website as much as they fight legislation and everything. They have also said, that NRA isn't 100% our friends, but if you want to understand these issues a little better, you have to reach into some of the more valid experts. I recommend Gun Owners of America as a starting point to understand some of the nuances of these issues.
Yes, that is a good recommendation.
I don't want to bring you down to earth or anything, Binkley. I really like the higher level stuff.
You need to give people good recommendations.
But this issue, it aggravated me because they throw all that. I was basically bamboozled by just exactly what you're talking about. Not that I would ever promote what their cause is, but it's hard to know the answers because you can't look at Fox News or any of those bull crap. I'm trying to not curse as much anymore. The BS media for the real arguments, the real rebuttals, the real refutations, because they're not giving you. They're making sure that nobody on either side thinks too deeply about it, or the argument would be over in a heartbeat.
Right. I agree. Anytime that you have information or a source for people to go to, I think we should totally tell people.
Yeah, certainly it starts you thinking about the issue then from there, how to think about it, and then you can think about it for yourself. But if you don't even know what thread to pull on. What?
Right. Anytime stuff is oversimplified, there is an agenda there. Maybe you agree with the agenda, but it should be investigated so that you're not being bamboozled. And
you can't even defend it if you don't know the other guy's argument.
And if it does serve the agenda that it claims to serve, and it does align with what you want it to align with, then scrutiny is only going to confirm that if you scrutinize the nuances of it and you recognize your own bias and the fact that cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias is going to play a factor in. So it's a lot of recognize our own psychological mechanisms as well as diving into the nuances of stuff. We talk about how we don't have time to look at the nuances of everything, which is true, but what prevents us from diving into stuff like this, even more than that, what's the biggest obstacle to that is our own psychological bias and the avoidance of cognitive dissonance. It's truly uncomfortable to invalidate a belief that we've held for a really long time. It's been embedded with us, and they know that, and that's why they simplify it and they polarize the debate.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, it really took a lot for me to even realize that. I just remember thinking, why are Democrats what's wrong with them? I wasn't a Republican. I was always a libertarian. I was like, why? And you have to allow yourself to try on the other person's viewpoint in order to understand it. And I did for a long time. I was like, maybe they're right. Maybe I didn't vote Democrat, but I just thought maybe socialism is really the way to kind of even the scales of these inequalities and privileges that reign across the world. And just being open-minded about it, I saw that it made no sense and failed. For years I would be open-minded about it. So now I'm really not afraid of questioning my own assumptions, not because I think I'm going to end up being right. It's actually kind of painful when it comes to religious stuff or uncomfortable truths about the way the world really works and how people in power, how duplicitous they are. It's painful. It's horrible to see people on your own side being like that, or who you think are on your side, or the origins. When you look back, some of the origins of people who call themselves libertarians, it's painful. The Pope, I can't stand it. But you have to have the courage to do it. And that is the moment when the scales start to fall from your eyes. And I think once you allow yourself to do that, you're basically invulnerable to propaganda, because you're just like, okay, what's your argument? Let's talk about it. You don't have to be hostile. You don't assume the dialectic where you battle each other and end up in the same place you started. Just like, hey, I'm totally into it. Tell me what you got. I'm so open-minded on my show that people, as one caller said, you better not be too open-minded or your brain will fall out.
Yeah.
But I do think that you have to have courage, fortitude.
I agree. Yeah, it does take a lot of courage. And you said something that, it reminded me of what's going on at the march and this whole movement. The March for Our Lives is a part of the Power to the Polls movement that the Women's March started on January 20th. That's what that was for. They just used the gun thing to exploit people to get there, to get voter registration. And they're targeting 18 to 29-year-olds in that case. But one of the messages that's being delivered, along with the NRA is horrible and evil and you can't question children, is that the NRA put these corrupt people in power who don't care about children, who murder children, and we need to elect our people who are going to be virtuous, which is just so insane.
So what's to keep the bad guys on the other side from putting a D next to their name, if that's how it really works?
Right. And that's, I think you read that the propaganda written by Yules, where he talks about the ideology and how the ideology, and in this case the identities, are used not because the people in power believe them, but because they're a vehicle to concentrate power. Vladimir Lenin in Russia, he saw ideology as a way to manipulate the masses.
A tactic.
Yeah. He didn't see it as something he believed in or cared about establishing. He saw it as how he could manipulate the most people. And because of the lure of the Marxist ideology, the laying the problems of all of the suffering on the feet of the rich and powerful, it gives people a reason to not blame themselves. And it gives people hope that this person and this group that they're going to join is going to give them everything they ever wanted, which is exactly what's going on with this. I mean, this movement is a Marxist-type movement, a Lenin-type movement. Do what?
It does something else, too. And ideology helps you in a good way. I mean, principles, are good. But an ideology helps you square away all of the overstimulating bombardment. Like, you've seen that psychology stuff where if they take away whatever your filter is and you're actually bombarded with all the stimulation, the stimulus that you're getting, like, you'll go insane. Like, it's literally.
Like my dog when he goes in PetSmart.
Yes. My people have ADD, my husband, my son, they just can't absorb all the stimulation. And so if you have an ideology, it allows you to keep things in order. You have an experience and you can tuck it away into a cubby that makes sense to you. And then when that paradigm, that ideology stops making sense, you can either have the courage to reevaluate it. And I'm not saying ideology doesn't exist and isn't valid. I'm just saying there are a lot of competing ones, so obviously they're not all right. But if you can't jam them into the cubbies anymore, your experiences, you have to have the fortitude to look at it. And otherwise, and I've seen this happen in many, many people as they get older, many people, maybe most people, their ideology doesn't fit their experiences and they start to go a little insane. It's kind of like why everybody hates their mother-in-law. You're living in a fantasy world. That's exactly not how it works. But as you refuse to allow experiences that undermine your ideology from making your ideology change, you have to really cut off the experiences you have. You build a bubble for yourself.
Yeah.
You seek out people who agree with you, and it makes you feel comfortable because it's a little scary to think that you can't really figure out how the world works. Yeah. So people really want it. And
everything
that's
reinforces it. Yeah. It's good to have principles. It's just having an awareness that it's subject to being manipulated by a skillful politician who can speak the language of that ideology. So critical questioning, just like we talked about, scrutiny, that's the biggest defense in discourse. Those are always the biggest defense to propaganda. Speaking of which, we have a little bit more time, I think like 20 minutes or so. I listened to another one of George Lakoff's podcast. George Lakoff, the cognitive linguist who helps establish the talking points for the left. He studies the science of language, essentially. Trigger words is his specialty. His latest podcast is a doozy, I have to tell you. It's about the most boring subject in the world, yet the podcast is really interesting to me because it shows, not only on this issue, but on every issue, how progressives think about manipulating their subjects, propagandizing them. Unbelievable propaganda. Keep in mind when listening to some of these clips that they're talking about this stuff. They're talking about the messaging of how they need to communicate climate change better to get more people onto their side because it's such an imminent threat. Keep in mind that the things that they're saying them because they want their listeners to go out and do what they're saying.
This just reminds me, maybe you can tell me if it folds in. We did a show on Saturday on WSB. I was totally thrown off by like some stuff that was going on with other callers and all this kind of stuff. I was just a little distracted. And so when I got attacked by this guy, again, I guess I handled it fine. People tweeted like, oh, that was great. I could have done better, I feel like. But there was a guy, Kada, who called and was totally attacking me. And then you said, oh, yeah, I've got the Lakoff clip where he tells people how to do that. And then we actually dug up the Lakoff clip, which said to do exact down to like when people talk about the Constitution, you say this. And the guy had just said that. So when you were just telling me this is telling people what to do, is that what you're talking about? Or
yes, that's exactly what it is.
Else? Yeah.
There was another lady who called and was repeating verbatim talking points. Yeah, Lisa. And she followed up on Twitter and she was responding with the exact same talking points that we had talked about, that Lakoff had told them that were on the signs and on the slogans. I kind of thought that this might happen because that was the day of the March for Our Lives rally.
Yeah.
They were at that rally and they were told to go do that. And
they started calling after the rally broke.
I would put reasonable arguments on Twitter. Yes. Like I would say, well, there's no evidence. A RAND study showed that there was no evidence that any of the proposed legislation, or you don't know of, would lower gun violence. I said, obviously everybody wants to lower gun violence. So let's find a way to really do it because that legislation, there's no evidence. Her response was, we call BS. How much weed do you smoke? Something like that.
Did she really? Yeah. We call BS was something that you traced directly to something Lakoff said.
Yeah, she said we call BS to me. That's exactly what she said.
I'm sure she got the other line. I noticed I had to chuckle. I wasn't really following her tweets, but I saw one thing where she said, the marchers today, whom Monica likes to call, quote, kids. I was like, you mean the children?
The 1-year-old,
1.5-year-old.
I saw like a 3-year-old was holding a sign that was like, I'm only in elementary school, and even I know this is bullshit. And the kid's just holding it, like standing behind it, doesn't want to hold it, doesn't know what it says. And then I also went and found that sign on one of the websites that passes out signs, on one of the Women's March websites. So not only did they have that sign, they made that sign specifically to hand out to children at the marches.
What about the one that said, it didn't say this, but it made me feel like that's what it was saying. Would you respect my opinion more if I was still a fetus?
Yes, I saw that one. And there was like a 5-year-old holding that. Kid doesn't know what that
with
is.
A smile on her face. I was like, you know what? What if you were and nobody respected
Those
you?
Those parents, it's child abuse. Some of this stuff.
It actually, could you? I don't know if they respond to that when people take their kids to the March for Life. And I have to say, when my kids were exposed to that stuff, I used to go with my mom and I was kind of okay with it. But when my kids were exposed to it in Catholic school, they were extremely puzzled about the question of abortion. And I actually thought it was inappropriate to expose kids that young to that subject. Yes, both sides are guilty of that, in my opinion, but
I agree.
It's not okay.
I agree. I started replying to her stuff by saying, you go, girl, resist. I started going with her because I realized I know this, but it's hard. You can't argue reason against pure emotion, and it doesn't work. And at this rally, they're conditioned to react purely emotionally.
And how does she even conjure up that emotion? I mean, it was like, really? Are you a grown woman? She was like, she was attacking me like, are you a mother? I'm like, it's 50-50 that I am anyway. Like, how do you think that's the right line of defense?
That was the dumbest question that
people got upset by.
Never listened to your show. Oh
yeah, these people who were calling, because the one guy was like, if you were a lawyer you would know. I'm like, well, I am a lawyer.
Yeah, you're like, I went to Harvard and
I am a mom.
You know what they reminded me of? I made that video where I call my senator. I use the indivisible script that they send out, and I call my senator, and I only use the script, and I don't change anything, even if the response isn't what they expect. So it's just through it. They reminded me of that when they called and on Twitter. But back to what you said about that originating with Lakoff. Yeah, Lakoff talked about how it's absurd for anyone to say a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. The polarizing speech that Emma Gonzalez gave, which was her "We Call BS" speech, and they had shirts and posters, and this is one of the things they pushed. At the end of her "We Call BS" speech, she says two things, and this is a tactic, a propaganda tactic. They attack the reasonable arguments ahead of time so that when people hear those arguments, they go, oh, and then they respond with that short-circuited "We Call BS" slogan that is rhythmically and hypnotically programmed into their head through these speeches that are played over and over again. But during the speech, she says, they will tell us that there is no evidence that gun reforms will lower violence. We call BS. That's not an argument.
Of course not.
And then she goes, they will tell us that a good guy with a gun will stop a bad guy with a gun. We call BS. And that's exactly how she responded when I linked the Rand stuff. It was "We Call BS." I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so programmed.
Yeah, you're a robot. Can I just address that actually with content for a second?
Yeah, good.
This is something. Why do the good guys have guns then?
Because they're evil and they hate babies.
But I mean, why do the cops have guns? Is Emma Gonzalez calling for disarming the cops? Is she saying the good guys should not have guns?
There were some signs saying disarm the police at the march.
Here's the thing. If they really wanted to close the borders of this country, put metal detectors up everywhere, and literally get rid of every single solitary gun, including the military and the police, I would be more okay with it than if they were just taking it away from law-abiding citizens. And I would ask Dianne Feinstein, who has some kind of sketchy history, how she took power and the gun she carries around.
Yeah.
If you want to go down that rabbit hole.
Harvey Milk, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think she was like on the spot. Like the conspiracy
Harvey Milk
theory,
was assassinated before she went to office, right?
Him and another councilman. And I think she actually rose to her position of power through that assassination. And she was supposedly there at the time. And the conspiracy theory is like she was in on it, of course. And she carries the gun that did it, like to this day, or that whatever backup. I don't know. I mean, that's just, that could go in the realm of crazy. I really don't know. But I would like to ask her or Paul Ryan or anybody else who has Secret Service, if we pass a law that bans all guns, a law, piece of paper, little black lines on a white piece of paper, if we pass a law that bans all guns, will you consent to no longer have armed guards?
Yeah, right.
Why? And then the question is, why? Why would he say, no, I want my armed guards? But what are you afraid of, Paul? No one else is going to have a gun. Who's your guy going to shoot?
Right. The guy.
Who's he going to shoot?
Yeah.
Some guy who didn't read the squiggly lines on the white piece of paper.
Yep.
Some guy who has a gun. Well, what about the guy who didn't read the squiggly lines on the white piece of paper who comes to my house?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
They don't want to get rid of guns. You're right. I
call BS.
Yeah, we call BS on that. Hashtag we call BS.
But I actually made an argument with thought and logic that I guess that discredits me.
You said we call BS and here is why. Is what you said.
As a cardinal sin. Don't introduce that. That's why they don't do. Oh my gosh. That folds into what we've been saying for years. A couple of years now. Why are people like Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper and the Wall Street Journal and Fox, and why is everybody, or really it was more the left guys on CNN, why don't they just pull out evidence? Why are they saying you need to believe us because we're CNN instead of actually giving evidence? You know how many times we've said that and we speculated that they were teeing it up to never need evidence, to discredit the very idea of evidence as a valid validator or invalidator.
Like it's above them to have to justify anything.
But this is where the rubber is hitting the road with that we saw coming, is what I'm saying. Do you, Brock?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Like what we talked about at the beginning of the show, if they eliminate all the sources that are like watching CNN and saying, hey, wait a minute, you contradicted something here and you didn't point out this thing that happened during that live crisis event. If they eliminate all of those people watching the watchers, then they don't have to provide any evidence.
Logic either. Yeah. Logic and evidence are now BS.
Yeah, both of them are on the way out. So, okay, let's play some of these Lakoff clips.
Yeah, fun.
I'm going to play the first one, just kind of establish the tone here. They had a guest on. His name is David Fenton. He calls himself a media activist. He is basically a PR guy for progressives, and he loves the idea of propagandizing progressives and Republicans especially about climate change. But this is Gil Duran opening the show. I'm going to go ahead and say anytime a show opens like this, you can pretty much assume they don't want you really doing any critical thinking.
This is Gil Duran, Dianne Feinstein's former communication director.
Yes, that's correct.
Global warming, climate change, climate crisis, ecological apocalypse, the sixth extinction, whatever you call it, it's the biggest emergency in the history of our species and every species. Yet very few Americans define this deadly global destruction as an urgent concern. It's almost as if it's too big a problem for most people to think about. We see the signs all around us: super blizzards, massive hurricanes, endless wildfires, unprecedented floods, record heat and cold. But oil companies and climate change deniers and Republicans have worked for decades to confuse the public about what's going on. Now it's 2018, and we have a president who doesn't believe in science.
So that's how the show opened right there.
Now, I'm not trying to influence you at all. I mean, that's a guy who has a point of view.
He was framing Dianne Feinstein's messaging.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that guy's a clown right there. That's not a real.
Well, he's a shill. He's working for somebody. Who's he working for? This is the problem now. I don't want to derail you, but like this, to manipulate democracy like that, it negates it.
Right, but they say that it doesn't. They say that the other stuff, the alternative arguments, the alternative perspectives, because they're wrong, that negates democracy.
Yeah, but the idea that you don't actually want the answer to come from the people, I get that. I'm not defending democracy, and I understand we're not a strict democracy. I'm just saying it's 100% demonstrates the danger of democracy as a weapon of tyranny.
All right. You're going to get a lot of those themes in these few clips we have.
All right, I'll try to refrain from interrupting.
This is David Fenton, the media activist and PR guy for progressives, talking about the problem of awareness, of the public awareness of the climate change problem.
Only 12% of the American public knows that the scientists all agree on climate change. That's it, 12%.
Did you know that fact? I love his focus on the 12%. He just all scientists, really.
But all scientists definitely do not agree.
That is the most absurd thing I've ever heard.
88% of the people do not buy his BS is what that's really what it is. It's not, he's like 12% of the people don't know this fact. It's like, no, 12% of the people don't believe that lie.
That is another way that they're saying there's only one side of the argument. But to suggest that 100% of people believe anything is absurd.
Yes, right. Yes.
Okay, so those are the kind of people we're dealing with. That was in the first 4 minutes of this discussion.
And who's their audience, though? It's not just who you're dealing with; it's who they're talking to.
Right, exactly. Their audience are the people that showed up to the March for Our Lives type stuff. They're children.
Children.
Lakoff talks about, since you said that, and we are talking about the education, I'll go ahead and play. Okay, Lakoff gives his prescription for how to solve the climate change problem, but not only the climate change problem. This is something that he would apply to any problem. You can tell by the way he talks about it. If you listen to his podcast, you can tell every single week he has a problem with journalism.
I would change the journalism schools. I've occasionally taught at the UC Berkeley Journalism School, given a lecture on the sort of things we talked about today. And the first thing I do is point out that there is no neutral language, that language fits frames, that you're always framing no matter what you say. And this goes against what is taught. They are taught that language is neutral, that it just fits the world, and they're supposed to say who, what, when, why, and they're not supposed to say anything that is prejudiced politically on one side or the other. They have to be fair and balanced. If they say one thing, they have to have the opposite view he said, she said, and and then you get these CNN rounds where people just argue against each other and fight, and it doesn't go anywhere. And the reporters and the people who do the weathermen don't go out and say what's really happening.
They do that, though. They do it already. The journalism is obviously so incredibly biased. Like, what is he calling for? You know what I mean? I suggest that what he just said is foreshadowing of he's laying the groundwork for a much bigger operation, maybe folding in with this Google news thing, the next step of that.
Google News Initiative. One of the students from that school, from Stoneman Douglas, was on CNN after the march, and she said journalism is activism. So that's basically what Lakoff is saying right here. He would teach.
But the crazy part is what Google is saying, and what the Soros fact-checking thing, they're saying that we don't, fake news is not okay. We need all the same facts. But dig a little deeper into their influences, from Lakoff, who's way in the back, to Emma Gonzalez, who's the face of it, and everybody in between, which includes CNN and Google and everything else, they're all saying the facts need to be a vehicle for the agenda. You know what I'm saying? They're calling for an inherent, to make news subjective as a moral and practical calling.
Got to be moral. Yep.
Yeah. So they're saying the news needs to be subjective, and then Google's saying, okay, we're going to cut out half of the news because it's not, quote, true, but true. It's like newspeak. It's like the Orwellian thing. It's like what communism would say. The words my father taught me this about communism. He was a big Cold Warrior, and he said they would say peace means what's good for us. So they could say peace and mean war because it didn't mean what it meant on its face. The words themselves have a political implication for the bias or the purpose. It's that ends justifies the means thing, where all the means, even the words, have to serve the end.
Yeah, absolutely. This clip is a pretty good illustration of that. Fenton is talking about what they need to do because right now they're losing the climate change battle because people just don't care about it. And this is a very telling clip, and this theme went on throughout the entire episode.
Most of the people in the environmental community and the activist community in general, we come from the law, we come from the sciences, and we come from the humanities. And innately, we are taught this enlightenment fallacy, that if you present the facts to people in power, they'll make a rational decision, light bulbs will go off in their head, and everything will be great. And it's just not true. It's really never been true, but it's certainly not true now. So there's a huge imbalance happening, which is the people at the oil companies and the coal and gas companies who have this business school and business marketing background, they know to gunk up the works, to confuse people. They spend money on it. They focus on it. They're very good at it. And we're basically largely missing from this. There's a propaganda war going on this issue, which will affect the survival of humanity. And we are not playing. We are not even on the field. So this is a huge imbalance that I think is very important we all speak out about, because we're not going to solve climate change without the public. A group of elites in a back room are not going to solve this. So unless we connect to the public and help them understand the nature of this emergency and how it affects them and their families, we will not succeed. The other side does that. The reason we don't do this is we don't think this way. This is not in the DNA of our community, and that's what I think we need to
make this stop. I can't listen to another second of it. It's such upside down, total crap. The report from Iron Mountain, which, I don't know what that.
Can you hold that thought one moment? Because I have a short clip that goes with that one.
I can't take it anymore.
This is a very short one that goes with that one.
I have cognitive dissonance. Go ahead, give me one more, but I'm going to cap my piece.
The many hundreds of millions of dollars in climate philanthropy every year goes into the supply of policy, and we don't lack a supply of policy. We know what to do. They've succeeded. We have a great supply of policy. We lack demand.
So they already know what they want to implement. They just have to manipulate the public into accepting.
All right, I have to vent now.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so the report from Iron Mountain, which people call it a satire, hoax. It's definitely, I mean, it came out in 1963. So the stuff it said was at the very least unbelievably prescient or a plot or whatever. And they talk about an environmental hoax to get people to need world government that has to cross borders, and that everybody would be very hard to pull off because everyone in the scientific community and media, whatever, would have to be on board with this. They would have to buy into it. So the idea of the environmental crisis came from a desire to manipulate people just in the way this guy is saying they do not do. It's really amazing to me that guy, you could just put opposite in front of every single sentence and it would be closer to the truth. And then I have another thing.
What you said a moment ago, I meant to tell you before the clip about the morality of it. I have a clip. We're not going to have time to play it. There's a couple other I want to play instead, but Lakoff says at one point, we need to tell reporters that it is immoral not to call hurricanes global warming and climate change hurricanes. It is immoral not to call it what it is, not to call it the truth.
Yeah, that'll get people to do it.
Yeah, and then the other guy goes on to say, we need to tell people that an asteroid is coming towards the Earth, or that the North Koreans are poisoning our air, and that it's going to destroy our world as we know it. If we do that, then they will be like, let's nuke North Korea right now, or let's nuke that asteroid. And then after they say that, we can go, ha, it's climate change. That's one of his suggested solutions.
Yeah, that's so manipulative, because he's saying we can't take the chance. And this is where things are really dangerous.
Yeah.
We can't take the chance of trusting people with liberty, with the responsibility of being a human being.
Lakoff talks about how Republicans need to understand that it threatens their liberty, it threatens their safety, it threatens their children's lungs, it threatens their family. He goes just in detail of all
liberty does not equal safety. But I have to say something important. Is that he was talking about John Bolton was just named as National Security Advisor. I mean, that guy, I'm not going to go off on him, but when I talked last time about the portents of war, this tops the cake. That guy is scary. And I remember reading, you introduced me to a term, stovepiping, and when I investigated that term for my glossary, I came out with like a New Yorker article, or I don't know where it was, from one of those big publications that talked about the word stovepiping entered the lexicon because of what John Bolton did in the Bush administration.
Yeah.
I think it was to promote the Iraq War or whatever. And the stove, think of a stove is like a big potbelly stove. It's got all the information in there. And the pipe that goes right up to the top is Bolton was controlling that pipe. So he, instead of having regular intelligence guys go through and analyze information or whatever, he said, don't analyze it. Just give me all the raw data, and I'm going to data mine or whatever. I'm going to pull out what I want, and I'm going to shove it up the stovepipe so the president sees what I want him to see. This goes back to Colonel House in the Woodrow Wilson administration, one of the founders of the CFR, who said, we just have to control the State Department so we can control what the president thinks. And they didn't really get full control of the White House. After him was Harding, then Coolidge, then Hoover, until FDR, who was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
FDR could not get out. So he was absolutely a captive to the stovepipe, which they invented. And look at what happened under FDR. So this guy is saying we need to stovepipe to the people. That's not democracy. What he needs to say, you know what I'm saying? What is his justification for that? As an elitist, what is his justification? He might as well be king. Is that what he's calling for? And if you ask them honestly, some of them will say yes. they no longer believe in democracy.
Bernays believed that a small group of people should be in charge, like you just said, these small elites. But he said that's not our system, so we have to do it another way.
That's the thing, and it's deceptive, and that's when you can start getting like Satan is the prince of lies. If you want to put it in moral terms, lies are not okay. You sooner have the asteroid hit the Earth than defend yourself.
Right? Yeah. Anytime you're trying to understand the insanity of some of these progressive arguments or what they're doing, ask the question, what deep moral conviction has this issue been linked to in their minds? And that's why they're able to, with such passion, show no use of reason and are purely driven emotionally because of that moral thing that's embedded deep within them. All right. This is the last one I'm going to play, so I think we're about out of time. This is one of the proposed solutions that Arnold Schwarzenegger is already implementing, and then that'll be it.
This week, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Republican, former California governor, megastar, announced that he's going to sue major oil corporations for first-degree murder for what climate change is doing to the planet because of their product.
Bravo.
George, what do you think about that framing?
I think it's an excellent idea. There's a court suit right now. The San Francisco Chronicle had a story today on a suit in San Francisco before a judge saying that the oil companies are responsible for sea level rise and they should be paying for a seawall. I think there should be lawsuits everywhere. Schwarzenegger's lawsuit is a great one. It's a very, very important one.
Rex Tillerson knew for decades that his business model and his products were going to swamp the coastal cities of the world. He knew that. That is the definition of war criminal, in my view. But we don't talk about it this way, and we allow the media to treat people like that with respect. Incredible. So this is another measure of how we don't galvanize the public. We are so meek about these things. So these lawsuits are very important.
There was a study released a couple of years ago about the discovery of oceans that are embedded deep within Earth's core that have been slowly leaking out for centuries that could potentially contribute to the rise in sea levels. My point in expressing that is that there are a variety of factors that we don't know about that also contribute to some of these things. And he already said a moment ago, we already have the policy. So that means that they are unaffected by new information. And when you're unaffected by new information, that's propaganda. That's not
Al
true.
Gore has multi-million-dollar property in Santa Barbara. That's why would he do that?
Yeah.
I got to go.
All right. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.
See you later. Subscribe, propagandareportdaily.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our Patreons and people who've donated on PayPal. You are the reason we can continue doing the show. We will talk to you next time.